If you don't like Frankenstein's monster dancing to Putting on the Ritz, like, I don't know how to help you, man.
Let's just say I'm Frankenstein's monster.
Say it out loud.
Frankenstein!
Frankenstein.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
No, just the bride.
Welcome back to the final episode of Franken-Fridays, the segment reviewing as many Frankenstein adaptations as possible in preparation for Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein and Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride. And today, of course, we've reached The Bride. Written and directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal, starring Jessie Buckley as the titular The Bride and Christian Bale as Frankenstein. Here we are. We've made it. What a strange film to end on. Okay. We're going full spoilers today, so if you haven't seen The Bride, I recommend you check it out because I think it is very interesting and very different. It seems to be getting mixed reviews just from a very brief glance at various stuff. I had a blast with it. There's some goofy stuff in it, which we'll get into, but mostly I had a great time, and I think it's doing a lot of interesting and fun things. Go see it and decide for yourself. Form your own opinion. I recommend it. Anyways, let's dive into it. So the plot of this one is, right off the bat, insane. So the ghost of Mary Shelley, also played by Jessie Buckley, possesses a sex worker who's a mob informant, and she has a crazy outburst at a nightclub and then gets killed by the mob. Meanwhile, Frankenstein's monster also exists in this universe where Mary Shelley seems to also exist. So, how does that work? Don't worry about it. Anyways, the monster, played by Christian Bale, is suffering from the male loneliness epidemic, and he goes to seek out Annette Bening, who is playing... what's her character's name? It's something wacky, which I loved. Dr. Euphronius. And he's like, hey, you're a scientist. Can you make me a bride? And then she's like, maybe. And then they dig up Jessie Buckley and make her into a bride of Frankenstein. Also, it's the 30s in Chicago. And then we have, an adventure from there. And I'll get into more of it as we go. So... right off the bat, a lot of wacky shit is happening. Mary Shelley is a character in this movie, played by the same actress who plays the Bride of Frankenstein. This is a callback to the original Bride of Frankenstein, which I talked about. Of course, you can go watch that review, where the actress in that movie, Elsa Lanchester, plays both the Bride of Frankenstein and Mary Shelley in a little intro flashback sequence where we see part of the infamous weekend writers retreat sleepover where she came up with the idea to write Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's a fascinating person with a really interesting life. Her husband Percy, also fascinating, kind of a scumbag, left his wife for Mary when Mary was like 17 or 18 or something insane. My favorite fun fact about Mary Shelley is that allegedly, and this is just theorized by historians, may or may not be true, but allegedly she may have lost her virginity to Percy while on top of her mother's grave because she was like having an affair with Percy while he was still married to a different woman, and the only place that they could meet like publicly that wouldn't have been too scandalous would have been like, oh, she's grieving for her dead mother in this public graveyard. You're allowed to go, out there. That's a public place you're allowed to go without the accompaniment of a man, right? So potentially she may have lost her virginity whilst visiting her mother's grave, which is like the most goth thing ever. I love it. The original goth baddie, fascinating person. And yeah, this has been talked about in lots of different places, but allegedly she came up for the idea of Frankenstein while her and Percy were hanging out with their other friend, Lord Byron, who's another weird writer guy who was like probably bisexual and living what was considered a very scandalous life at the time. Anyways, they're hanging out at his like mansion for a weekend or whatever, and they come up with the idea to challenge each other to write the scariest ghost story or horror story that they can think of. And Mary can't come up with anything for the first couple days, and then in a dream she gets the idea of Frankenstein, this guy who creates a dude. And so we get a depiction of that weekend in The Bride of Frankenstein from 1935, where this weird throuple hanging out at his cabin writing ghost stories.
The air itself is filled with monsters.
It's one of my favorite sequences from the original Bride of Frankenstein for a couple of reasons. One, I love the idea of casting the same actress to play Mary and the Bride of Frankenstein. Two, we get to like depict this famous spot where these writers were just like vibing and doing weird creative stuff that would go on to become famous. Like I think it was Lord Byron wrote a story called Vampire that went on to maybe inspire Dracula. There's all kinds of interesting stuff about this whole thing. Anyways, 2, we get to see that. And then 3, it also specifically is a retcon in order to build upon the first movie that didn't really follow the book that closely. And then in the second movie, they have this scene specifically to, one, recap the first movie, but then Mary goes on to be like, oh, well, actually, there's a bunch more that happened. And then we get like a bunch more scenes that are actually from the book, unlike the first movie that has like a little bit of stuff from the book. So I liked all that. I thought that was very cool and a cool way to do that. And Mary Shelley actually gets fucking credited in the credits of the second movie. Anyways, I'm going off on a weird tangent but it's relevant because this new version of The Bride does a lot to pay homage to specifically the original 1935 The Bride of Frankenstein, such as casting the same actress to play both Mary and the bride. So yeah, strangely, the ghost of Mary Shelley possesses Jessie Buckley before she comes back from the dead. So that's already weird, because if it's like a thing that happens after she comes back from the dead, that'd be like whatever. Like that would make more sense to me, because it's like, oh, I don't know, it's a ghost getting sucked into the body of someone returning from the grave. Sure, all kinds of weird stuff can happen, perhaps, I don't know. But no, it specifically happens before she dies and is maybe part of the reason she did die. I don't know. Weird choice, but I loved it. Because then we get like 2 strange performances from Jessie Buckley doing a weird Chicago accent as well as like her normal-ish British accent. And she has like multiple personalities, so she's like speaking to herself at certain points, and then certain points that she'll have like a weird nervous tick and Mary will like come out and say some shit. It's a bizarre, insane performance, and I loved it. But of course this is also important because the movie is very interested in reclaiming Frankenstein as like a feminist thing, or at least as a thing created by women. And that's a big theme in the movie, is like women not being taken seriously by men. We see that in several different relationships throughout the movie. Like there's a lady detective played by Penelope Cruz. She has a male partner. Everyone thinks the male partner is the one actually doing the detective work, but really it's Penelope. This is echoed again with Annette Bening's doctor character, where she usually just goes by Dr. First Initial Euphronius, and most people assume that she's a man, because how could a lady be a doctor? And that's, the same thing that has happened to many different female authors throughout the years, where they've either gone by a pen name that's a man's name, or just the first initial and last name. Again, this was a thing with Mary Shelley back in her day, where a lot of people suspected that Percy Shelley, well, surely famous writer and poet Percy Shelley must have helped her. He must have done most of the writing for her, because she's a lady, and how could a lady write a whole book? Which is obviously stupid. So yeah, lady doctor in this one, which is also an interesting choice, since usually the concept is like a man trying to play God. There's probably an essay you could write about the different, how that alters the meaning of the story, because like a man trying to play God, a man trying to create life, there's probably something patriarchal to that. There's probably something a little bit misogynistic there, where man is like jealous of the woman's ability to create life, and so he has to dig up graves and make a guy out of dead bodies in a crime against God and nature. But women can just make make life themselves. They don't need to dig up bodies or whatever. So there's probably something there. I don't know. The main context here is sort of a different thing, because Annette Bening is not like Frankenstein. She's a different character. She actually reminds me of a character, again, from the 35 Bride of Frankenstein, named Dr. Pretorius. Not at all a character for the book, but he was the guy who was making little tiny people in the craziest visual effects you've ever seen. And then he's like, but I need your help, Frankenstein. And it's like, dude, why? Anyways, that felt like Annette Bening's character to me was like a reference to that, just like another weird doctor who also exists and has heard about Frankenstein's research and wants to play around with the idea of making a guy from dead tissue. So anyways, there's a lot going on here. Christian Bale gets her to help. They dig up Jessie Buckley, and there's a moment at which I really liked. When he first sees Jessie Buckley, he's like, oh no, she's too beautiful. She's too beautiful to bring back to life. This is a bad idea. And, you know, Annette Bening's like, oh, it's too late to stop now. We've come this far, or whatever. And they go ahead with it, because we also need the movie to happen. So the main story of this one is the bride gets brought back to life. She doesn't remember who she is. And Frank, or Frankie, as he's sort of called in this one, convinces her that they're a couple and that they're married. And I got like, there are parts where they're like, oh, we had an accident, and you had an accident, and and I took you to the doctor, and now you're better. So there's a scene I forgot to talk about that I think is really interesting, where the bride and Frankenstein are doing their thing, and she's starting to question like his story. She's like, oh, if we're married, like, where's my ring? What happened to the ring? And he's like, oh, we had to pawn it to party and pay for all these oysters. We had all these oysters. We've already established in the movie that she doesn't like oysters, and this is like one of the things that kind of tips her off that Frank might be gaslighting her and might be full of shit. But the way I was interpreting that scene was, I was thinking that like, she kind of knows. She kind of knows that his story doesn't add up, but she's choosing to believe it anyways. And I think that's really interesting. Maybe it's because she doesn't have a lot of options in the first place, and this guy seems to at least want to protect her, so she'll stick with him for now. Or maybe it's just that she's having fun in the moment, and so she's willing to like ignore some of the red flags. But in any case, I think that's an interesting character choice. And I think this movie is full of stuff like that, where it's exploring these characters who are making morally questionable decisions and deluding themselves to believing that things are going to work out okay. And I think that's interesting. Also, this is a movie that sounds like complete nonsense if you just explain what the plot is. And I noticed that while editing this review. So, yes, the plot is ridiculous if you just explain what happens in the movie. But mostly the thing that I found compelling about this one was the character stuff, the thematic stuff, and the way that it was like playing with and paying homage to the history of Frankenstein, the history of Frankenstein movies, and the history of movies in general. So that stuff I thought was fascinating. I care less about the details of the plot. Yeah. Thing about the bride trying to figure out who she is, trying to remember who she is. She ends up going by a couple different names throughout the movie. We find out at one point that her name was Ida when she was alive. For a while she goes by Penelope when she's with Frank. There's a whole theme about what's in a name. Again, calling back to Mary Shelley. not getting proper credit in the first movie. I talked about that in the short. Dr. Euphronius having to use a different name or a variation on her name to get credibility, to be considered, to be taken seriously in the scientific community because she's a woman. The concept of a person's name having meaning or power behind it is a concept that comes out throughout various different versions of Frankenstein, including some of the ones we've talked about before. That's a big theme in Del Toro's version of Frankenstein with the name Victor Frankenstein. In the silliest version, I, Frankenstein, the monster gets renamed Adam by the angel gargoyles because, get it, Bible, and he gets like upset at people when they call him Frankenstein because he's like, that's not my name. So yeah, the concept of a name and who gets to decide a name. Do you get to decide your own name? And what the name signifies and means is a big theme throughout this movie. Bride trying to find her name as sort of a metaphor for her trying to find her own identity. Yeah, a lot of kind of queer stuff in this one. The movie opens with her kissing a woman, and then they go to like a gay bar, like 20 minutes in. So yeah, there's like a bunch of queer coded stuff going on in this one. Like the bride eventually literally decides that like, no, Ida, that's my dead name. I'm the bride. Okay, so the plot is that Ida turns out was a police informant working for the mob. So she's a sex worker working for the mob. She gets information from various people involved in the mob, or she's just working at the club owned by the mob boss. I forget. But then she's also informing the police guy who was working with Penelope Cruz to investigate these Frankenstein murders, which I'll get to. So she was informing stuff to him, and then they got into a relationship, so that made that whole thing extra super complicated. So now the mob is after her, but they thought they killed her already, but then they see her, or no, they just get harassed at the gay bar. They're like, you're weird looking. That's what it is. Okay, so she goes to the gay bar with Frankenstein. They have a part. They dance. They have a good time. Well, she dances. He watches her dance. But they mostly have a good time until some people harass them, and then Frankenstein kills them. Then they go on the run, and then the mob is after them also, and a bunch of stuff happens, and the police are after them, and they go to New York and they dance in the Friends fountain for a bit. This is a real scene in the movie. So okay, so basically the main plot becomes like this Bonnie and Clyde. We're freaks, we don't fit into society, let's go on the run and do crime, and they eventually fall in love for real. I mean, Frankenstein's basically in love with her at first sight, but the bride takes a minute to warm up to him. And he actually has some moments of tenderness and some moments of like, hey, I'm dangerous, I'm a bad guy, this was a bad idea, you shouldn't be with me. And that actually makes her kind of more sympathetic towards him. I like their relationship fine enough. I think Christian Bale is fine in this movie, but I was really more interested, like, I think he's good. He's not better than Jacob Elordi, but he's also not trying to do the same kind of thing. It's a very different vibe of a movie, which maybe hurt it a little bit. I don't know. People seem to be pretty in consensus on Del Toro's Frankenstein. I loved it. I thought it slapped. Everyone else seems to think it's a banger. It's up for a bunch of Academy Awards, so good for it. This movie is not trying to be the book at all, despite having Mary Shelley as a character, which is like, it's such a different kind of movie, and it's trying to do something so totally different that I don't know how to compare them. But if you were to compare them, I could see a lot of people being like, what the fuck is this? This isn't like Del Toro's at all. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I like it. So a bunch of stuff happens. They're doing Bonnie and Clyde shit. That's kind of the vibe. It's a little bit Joker, Fla-Li-La-Do, number 2, the Joker 2. Harley and Joker doing crimes and being weird and being like, oh, society, you don't understand. There's this one sequence that I think is kind of goofy. The build-up is fine. They end up in New York, and they go to this club in New York where they meet Jake Gyllenhaal, who's in the movie, and he's like a 1930s musical actor, like a Gene Kelly type. They end up at this party and they end up crashing this like fancy party. This is a fancy restaurant. Then they like possess everyone to do a musical dance number to Putting on the Ritz from Young Frankenstein. We get a Young Frankenstein reference, and it's just like so wacky. It's unclear like how much is literally happening, because it looks like they're, through the power of dance and Frankenstein energy and maybe ghost magic or something, they're like possessing the people in the club and getting them to dance like Frankensteins. It's so weird. I love it. Or it's just, you know, it's like a more of a metaphorical thing, that they're just like dancing and having a good time and captivating everyone through their strange don't give a fuck energy. But then the police show up and things get out of hand, and oh no, and Jessie Buckley's like, I'm gonna kill everyone and I got something to say, and she has this whole speech which is a combination of like her flashing back through memories of the mob stuff that she's been informing on, and how like the mob has been, you know, systematically killing women and making them disappear and treating them badly and stuff. But it also felt like she was like literally getting flashes of women that had been killed recently, or been mistreated recently, that she knew, which is also interesting and weird. I liked it. I thought it was cool. The weird part that was a little goofy and didn't quite work for me is that after this sequence, somehow, even though there's like, it's the 30s, and like there was some, you know, reporters there or whatever, and several eyewitnesses, but somehow everyone in America is like heard of her speech, and it's resonated with women everywhere, and they start making a bride revolution, a clown revolution. It's the Joker revolution. We're all clowns here. And the Joker madness has spread through Gotham City, and everyone's a clown now, and everyone's dressing like Frankenstein, the Bride of Frankenstein, and doing a revolution of something. They're revolting. They're doing crimes, and they're saying the brain blast. They're saying the catchphrase, which is brain blast, and it's like, wait, what is happening? This sequence kind of lost me a little bit. It's really not that big of a part of the movie. It is a thing that happens, and I was a little confused because, first of all, how did all these people, like, sure, they could be inspired by the bride, I guess, but, like, how did they even hear about what she said and what happened? Because it wasn't, like, being recorded. It's the 30s. It's not like it's everyone, like, takes out their phones and starts recording it, and then, like, that catches on or goes viral or something. Like, it's just like a thing, like you would just hear like, oh yeah, these like crazy people like held up a nightclub and then shot a cop. If you were there at the party, her ramblings like were not coherent enough to like make any sense, even if you understood half of what she was talking about, because she just like grabs a gun and is suddenly like rambling about women and the dead, and she gets like partly possessed by Mary Shelley again. Like it would just seem like, yeah, that bitch was crazy. I don't know what the fuck she was on about, but somehow people understand what she meant and saw her, I guess, and like that like caught on enough for other people to like take up the battle cry, even though she didn't have a coherent battle cry. I don't know. Maybe that's part of the point is that like people, when people get fed up, it doesn't take much for them to decide to use whatever nonsense to revolt or something. I don't know. It didn't. That sequence didn't work for me. The party scene itself I thought was great. I was into it. But the stuff with like the clown revolution, I was like, what is this? What does this have to do with anything? That was the stuff that I thought was a little goofy and didn't quite work for me. But overall, I just had a really fun time with this one. There's some other stuff that happens towards the end. Eventually, like, they die in a Bonnie and Clyde tragic shootout kind of way. But, you know, Penelope Cruz is nice. She lets them get away and maybe get resurrected by Annette Bening. So yeah, whatever. They go on to have more adventures in the Frankenstein cinematic universe. Let's try to have some kind of coherent conclusion about concluding thoughts. Even if it doesn't seem like I've built to anything at all. At the end of the day, I think this movie's just really fun. And I think that's the main takeaway. There's some stuff that's a little goofy, that's a little like, wait, what? If you think about it too hard. But the main stuff of like the bride and Frankenstein going on a weird Bonnie and Clyde 1930s gangster adventure, the way that it like plays with the mythology of Frankenstein, but also completely throws it all away. The way that it wants to like pay tribute to Mary Shelley while also adapting almost nothing from her book. But also, at the same time, it was really fun to actually get to see a movie called The Bride that's about the Bride of Frankenstein that's actually about the Bride of Frankenstein. I talked about this before, but the original The Bride of Frankenstein, the bride barely fucking in it. She's great when she's in it in that one scene at the end, but it's literally one scene at the end. And yeah, in the book, the monster comes to Frankenstein and is like, make me a bride. He gets partway through and then abandons that idea, being like, this is probably a bad idea, and destroys it. And then in other versions, in other adaptations, we see him get a little farther along. Like Kenneth Branagh's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, he gets further along. He makes his wife Elizabeth, when she gets killed by the monster, he takes her and tries to resurrect her as a Frankenstein, but she doesn't last long. And then we got Del Toro's version where Elizabeth kind of ends up falling for the monster instead of Frankenstein, which is like the most Del Toro interpretation of the story, and I love it. But still not really about the bride, because that one's more about the relationship between Victor and the monster. So there's other versions that like play around with it a little bit, but this is the first one that's been like, no, the bride is the title character, it's about her. And it's about her like trying to navigate the fucked up patriarchal, misogynistic society that systematically treats women badly. It's ultra pop feminist, sex positive, queer positive, anti-cop, punk rock musical nonsense, and I just had a blast with it. I loved that this movie didn't give a fuck about what you should do or should expect, and just did its own weird thing. It takes various elements from the original The Bride of Frankenstein, some concepts from the novel, kind of, the ghost of Mary Shelley, but does it invoke her spirit or any of the things she was trying to talk about in the original book? I don't know. Probably not, but I still kind of like it because it's such a weird idea. And then it also just like pays homage to film history and various different film versions of Frankenstein, set in the 30s, which is when the original movies came out. But then we got young Frankenstein references in here. It has a very contemporary approach to the way it tells the story, but it's also like an homage to old Hollywood and old Hollywood tropes. The monster and the bride spend like a bunch of scenes just going to the movies and enjoying the movies and imagining themselves in the movies. In some ways, it's very Shape of Water coded. Is it wacky Joker, Harley Quinn, Joker 2, Folie à Deux, hot topic nonsense? Sometimes, maybe a little bit. But like what? You don't like goofy movies that have fun, silly dance numbers? If you don't like Frankenstein's monster dancing to Putting on the Ritz, like, I don't know how to help you, man. I also just love the look of the bride in this one. Like, just, she feels instantly iconic in a similar way that the original Bride of Frankenstein did. With the face, with the fucked up black on the face. I don't know. It works. It works for me. I like it. That's the review, basically. I don't know. I had fun. I liked it. Worked for me. What do you think? Have I gone crazy? I had a great time with this one. I really enjoyed it. Please let me know what you think, because I think this movie is fascinating and strange. How does it compare to Del Toro's version? I don't know. It's doing something totally different. But how does it rank amongst all the other Frankenstein movies that I've talked about? Well, you'll have to tune in next week to see how that all shakes out for one final Franken-Fridays. This one's strange and weird, but I liked it. Check it out and let me know what you think. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. If you didn't know, 100% of people that watch my videos are not subscribed. That's right. That's a real number. So the only way to not get recommended my videos is to subscribe. So if you hated this and don't want to see more of me, you should subscribe, because that's the only way YouTube will never recommend you my videos again. But that's it for now. We'll be back for one final Franken-Fridays. See you then. Bye-bye.